this video, I'm gonna give you the 5 most common mistakes that I see people making when they are setting up a US LLC, specifically as a non-resident of the US. And I say this as someone who has been running a US LLC as a non-US resident for the past 2 years, and I've made a ton of videos on the channel about it, and I know personally a lot of people who have set up US LLCs, and there's a lot of common mistakes that I see people making that I always have to tell them, okay, make sure you do this, make sure you take care of this. So in this video, I'm just gonna give you these mistakes so you don't have to make them. And just before we get into the video, I am not a tax advisor. This is not tax advice, this is not financial advice. These are just my experiences based on what I know, what I understand. If you want to know the specifics for your specific situation, you should always speak to an advisor, because this is always case by case. Mistake number 1 is not using a reputable agent. So you can absolutely set up a US LLC the DIY way, where you just file it directly with one of the states, you do all of the filings yourself, but this will take a lot of your time, and despite being the lowest cost service, it will actually in the long run probably end up being the most expensive way to do this, because there's going to be some mistake that you end up making. And even if you don't make any mistakes, what you need to consider is all of the tens or hundreds of hours that you need to spend researching how to do this properly and everything like this, when you could be spending that time just making more money in your business. And chances are, if you have a successful business, your time is going to be best spent on your business making money, rather than worrying about all of these like business setup and compliance kinds of things, which is exactly why you should absolutely appoint an expert to simply do all of these filings for you, to set up your business for you, to ensure that it's all fully compliant and that you don't need to spend your time doing all of this. Just consider that just missing one file or doing it improperly or not even doing it on time will lead to a fine of $25,000. So this is a very low cost and very easy business to run if you do things properly, but if you don't do things properly, it can become the most expensive kind of business that you run. So the agent that I'm now used to set up 2 separate US LLC for 2 separate businesses is called Dula. They're one of the most reputable agents in the market. They have set up over 10,000 businesses for founders in over 175 countries from all around the world. What they will do is, first of all, set up your business structure in the right kind of way. They will help you choose the right kind of structure. You will get consultation with one of the experts beforehand if you have any questions. They will file everything with the state as well as the IRS. They will get your EIN, your employer identification number, for you. They will help you get banking, everything like this. And most importantly, if you choose their total compliance plan, which I highly recommend, only for around $2,000 a year, they will do all of the annual filings for you, and it will ensure that you not only have your business structured properly, but it also stays 100% compliant for the lifetime of your business. And the money I spent on them pays for itself multiple times over every single year. So Dula are the paid sponsor of this video, and they're a partner of this channel. But like I said, the reason why I partner with them is because I use them myself, and I'm used them already to set up 2 different US LLCs. And because they're a partner of this channel, you can use the code DULA10 for 10% off whatever plan you choose with them. And make sure you use my link down below in the description to take advantage of the discount. So if you use an agent like Dula, you pretty much don't have to worry about the rest of these mistakes, but they're still good to be aware of. Even if you're using someone to do things for you, I'm still a fan of at least being aware of how things work at the high level. So the second mistake is not structuring your business properly. So there are some things to think about before you even set up your US company. First of all is, do you even want to set up an LLC, or do you want to set up a C corporation, for example? In the US, you have different business structures that are optimal for different purposes. Just broadly speaking, let's say you're running a location independent business, like an e-commerce business or a YouTube channel or a software business that you don't intend to sell later on or scale to like $1 billion valuation or something. The LLC is most likely going to be the easier structure. It's cheaper, it's simpler to run things like this. However, if you're going for something like a tech startup where you might want to take VC funding later on, using an LLC is probably not going to be the best option, because you cannot issue shares and do all these things that investors would be interested in if you're looking to take investment later on. So in that case, you'd want to use a C corporation. So you want to think about this before you set up your business. Then you need to think about which state do you set up your business in. Different states have different business laws, and depending on what you're doing, you want to think about which state makes the most sense. Broadly speaking, in most cases, if you're setting up a C corporation, people tend to use Delaware, like almost everyone uses Delaware. And if you're setting up an LLC, most people use Wyoming. That's just where the laws are kind of the best for those two different structures. And I personally use Wyoming for both of my LLCs. And then finally, you need to think about, are you going to have this LLC owned by yourself personally? Or if you have something like a UAE company, let's say you're a UAE resident like myself, do you want to have it owned by your company? There's going to be different considerations, different things to think about here. Broadly speaking, if you're living in a low or zero tax place like the UAE, it doesn't matter that much because all of the money from your LLC gets distributed to yourself personally, and then you pay low or zero personal income tax on that income. However, if you're living in a place with a high personal income tax, or you think you might live in a place like that in the future, then it might well make sense to have it owned by a holding company or something like that. We can then choose to not automatically have all the profits from this LLC paid to yourself personally, but you can pay them to this holding company and then essentially defer these taxes. So there's a lot of things to think about before you set up your business that you want to consider. Mistake number 3 is failing to do your annual filings correctly. So as a non-resident of the US, you don't need to do full tax reporting. You don't need to file full income statements, balance sheets, things like this, because for US tax purposes, an LLC, as long as you elect for it to be treated as what is called a pass-through entity, it is not going to be treated as a separate corporation by US tax law at all. So there is no corporate tax filings to be done. Essentially, the way it works is that all the profits of this LLC essentially automatically flow through to the personal income tax returns of the owner, or the corporate tax returns of the owner if it is owned by a company. However, there are still some filings that you need to do. Specifically, you need to file, first of all, the Form 1120 Pro Forma, which is like a very simplified income tax return where you just report some revenue and things like this. And then the Form 5472, which is where you're required to give the details about your foreign ownership if you are a foreign owner. And you're going to need to report any transactions between the LLC as well as any related parties. So essentially any distributions to yourself or any contributions from yourself to the LLC. Again, I don't know all of the details of these forms because I don't need to know that because Dula always filed them for me. But nevertheless, even if you have someone doing them for me, they're going to send you the draft. So they don't just file it for you. They send you the draft that is already filled. You're going to check it, make sure everything is correct, just like skim through it, and then you sign it and then they file it for you. And then there's going to be a few extra things throughout the year that they now have this new beneficial owner report. You have a state registration fee, which is an annual thing that you have to pay. It's very low, like $100 something. So there's not that much you need to do, but if you don't do them on time, if you don't do them properly, the US authorities are very aggressive about this and the fine's very high. So just make sure everything is done properly and you don't need to worry about anything. Mistake number 4 is thinking your US LLC is taxable nowhere. So the big benefit is that the US LLC is not going to be taxable in the US if you don't have any connection to the US. We'll talk more about that in the 5th mistake. But even if your US LLC is not taxable in the US, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be taxable anywhere, because most countries, pretty much every country that you'd consider in the world, have either what are called management and control rules or controlled foreign corporation rules, which means that even if you set up a company in some other country, but you live in some country, let's say the UAE, that company is going to be taxable in the UAE by UAE corporate tax laws as if it was a UAE company. And because in other countries' tax laws, there is not this concept of a pass-through entity, this US LLC is going to be treated as a company like any other by the domestic laws of where you actually manage and control this from. So if you want to save on tax, it is not enough for you to just set up a US LLC and keep living in your high tax country. You do actually personally have to relocate to a low tax country in order to take advantage of these tax benefits. It's just the benefit with the US LLC is that it's not automatically also taxed in the US by US corporate tax rates. So you can use this US LLC structure and get US banking, US payment processing, which is all going to be world class, and have a US structure that everyone in the world is going to trust while not having to deal with US tax laws. That is why you want to use it, but you want to make sure you also live and manage this company from a low tax country if you want to save on taxes. And on the topic of taxes, we also have mistake number 5, which is accidentally becoming taxable in the US. So the entire point, like I said again, of the US LLC as a non-resident is that you don't have to pay taxes in the US, but there are cases when your US LLC might become taxable in the US. And that is specifically if you have what is called US effectively connected income. First of all, if you are a US citizen, you can't take advantage of this. You are a US person. For as long as you are a US citizen, you're going to have to pay full US taxes. But if you're a non-US citizen, but you live in the US, so you're a resident of the US, this also doesn't work. You're going to be taxable in the US because you are a US resident. If you're not a US resident, you might still be taxable in the US if you have US effectively connected income. Again, this is something you need to talk to an advisor about to know all the specifics. But for example, if you have any member of your LLC, so let's say you have 3 owners and one of them lives in the US, this is going to constitute US effectively connected income and it's going to make your LLC taxable. But even if you don't have any owners in the US, if you have what I call dependent agents, so you have some long-term contractors or employees in the US, this is also going to constitute US effectively connected income, and at least the income that is contributed by those US dependent agents is going to be taxable in the US. And also, if you have any physical US presence, like you have a warehouse in the US, you have some physical US operations actually being done on US soil, that is going to constitute US effectively connected income. So to really benefit and not be taxable in the US, you want to make sure you steer away from the US as much as possible. So it's very funny. The US is the most aggressive country in the world when it comes to taxes for anything connected to the US, but you can still use a US structure as long as you're not in the US, and they basically don't care. It's very funny how it works, but that is essentially just how it is, which is why this is such a beneficial structure. So all of these mistakes can be avoided by simply using the right service provider who's going to tell you about these, who's going to make sure that you're not making any of these mistakes. Again, if you want to use Doula, you can use my link down below in the description and use the code DoulaThomas10 for 10% off. Now, of course, the US LLC isn't the best structure in every possible case. You always need to look at this on a case-by-case basis. But for example, one very popular case when the US LLC is absolutely the best structure that you should use is if you have a software company, so a SaaS company, which is in fact a business that I recently started. We started a new software that's now making money, and we use a US LLC set up with Doula for that business. If you want to find out exactly why the US LLC is such a good structure specifically for software companies, you can watch this video right here. So watch that video next, and I will see you in the next one.